For men my age, and at the time of this recording, I'm 63. Actually, for a lot of men younger than me, and starting about their mid 50s, we can start having issues with the prostate gland. And I certainly started having issues with my prostate all the way back in my late 30s. But I somehow or another got an infection. Maybe that triggered the rest of the issues with prostate problems I've had all these years. But it's an interesting thing to deal with, because if you're struggling with your prostate, if you're having an enlarged prostate, then that means that you get up several times during the night to have to go to the restroom. You can be out in public, and as soon as it hits you, you've got to go, and you got to go now. The medicine that the doctors prescribe you, things like Flomax or finasteride, but especially Flomax, has a terrible side effect for a lot of men that makes things just uncomfortable in a very personal way. I'll just leave it at that. Those of you that know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. But what I really want to talk about is the perspective of two doctors in my life. Now, the good news is I have lowered my PSA numbers dramatically. I don't have prostate cancer. I've had a recent MRI because one doctor wanted me to do it because he just was very concerned with the size of it. But when it comes to your prostate gland, it is a good idea. It's a very good idea to get more than one opinion, to go to two urologists and let both of them look at the situation and let both of them give you their 2 cents. And here's why. I've been going to one particular urologist as my primary one, and he's older and he's got a lot of experience. He told me that he's getting ready to retire coming up in a few months. And I've been to him all these years, and he always says the same thing. When he sees my PSA numbers even slightly elevated, he wants to do a biopsy. And everything I've heard about the biopsy is that it's extremely painful. It causes bleeding that doesn't end for a few days, and it's uncomfortable. And my dad, and I talk a lot about my dad, but my dad has given me a lot of life wisdom before he passed. This is his hat, by the way. And he had a biopsy at the request of his urologist, and he believes that because of it, and he had it when he was like 72 years old. My mom and he had a pretty nice marital relationship on up into their 70s until he had the biopsy, and he is convinced that the biopsy ended that for him. He was no longer able to be with my mother in the marital way, and that was hard for both of them. So he told me, he said, if there's any way you can ever not do that, don't do that. And so my primary urologist, he just automatically wants to do that. And I've always told him, unless you can feel when you do the exam, they do that exam where they feel your prostate. They can tell if there's bumps or nodules there or hardening that shouldn't be there. I said, until you feel that, you can forget it. I'm not going to do it. And so recently, my PSA number shot all the way up to 13.5. That was back in November of 23. And I went to him, and of course, his mindset was, that's terrible, that's awful, you've got to have the biopsy, I'm going to insist on it, you got to do it. And I just told him the same thing that I've always told him. No, I'm not going to do that. If you don't feel it, then I'm not going to. He said, well, I might not be always able to feel it. I said, well, okay. But at that point, since it was so high, I had decided what I was going to do was take some natural approaches, some health and dietary approaches and exercise approaches to lower those numbers on my own. And I did some extensive research. And in the description below, I've got a link for you to get a free download of an ebook. I did so much research that I literally wrote an ebook for you, and it's absolutely free of charge. You can have it. And so I told him I'm going to take 90 days and see what I can do to lower my numbers. And so I did all these health things. I mean, I changed my diet dramatically. I found out so many things that you can do naturally. Again, it's all listed in the ebook, so I'm not going to bore you with it here. But at the end of 90 days, that was like in February of 24, I went back to my primary doctor, had my numbers done again, and they came back 7 points lower, which is a dramatic drop. And so when I had that number, I went back to my urologist and he said, it's still too high, 7 or 6.5, whatever it was. It is too high. He goes, and it's a sign of prostate cancer. You need to let me do the biopsy. And so at that point, I made the decision to go and get a second opinion. And so I did. I went to see a different urologist, and his take on it was incredibly different and in a good way. His take on it was, I don't worry about PSA numbers. He said, I know guys that have a PSA of 30 up, and they don't have prostate cancer. And he said, I know guys that have a PSA of 2, and they do have prostate cancer. The whole deal with PSA is that it is not an indicator of prostate cancer. The medical doctor that actually discovered the PSA, I think it was back in the early 1970s. He himself has a video floating out there, and if I can find it, I'll link it in the description below. He himself has always said and concluded that PSA is not an indicator of cancer. You should never think you've got cancer because you've got a high PSA number. So the second doctor said, I'm not concerned with the numbers one way or another. He said, what I'm concerned about is trends. He said, now, if it's trending upward and trending upward dramatically, then we may have something to think about. But as long as you're able to function and you're not having any symptoms, and I wasn't getting up 3, 4, 5 times a night to go to the restroom. I wasn't having times where when it hit me, I just had to run to the bathroom. Even though my prostate is enlarged, I'm not having those. And he said, until you get there, we're not going to worry too much about it. So I liked what he told me. But I still went back. My urologist, my primary, called me and said, please come in and let's talk. And he said, it's just big, and you got to let me do this biopsy. And I said, no. I said, what other options do we have? He said, well, let's at least do an MRI on it. I said, okay, we can do that, just so you can be at peace. So we did the MRI, and a couple of days later, he literally called me, woke me up out of a dead sleep at 9 o'clock at night, and he said, your prostate is huge. It's gigantic. He said, there's no signs of cancer, though. He said, there are no signs of cancer anywhere. He said, but there's that 5% chance that since it's so huge that you have prostate cancer. And he goes, and I want to do the biopsy. And here's what I know about biopsies. It's just a hit and miss thing. They're just sticking the probes up there and picking out parts. I mean, they could totally miss the cancer. They could pick out a whole bunch of healthy stuff and totally miss the cancer. So it's a very unreliable process. So what I did was I told him no, and he still didn't like it. And I informed him at that time that I wouldn't be coming back to him since he's retiring. Nothing personal, but you're retiring. I'm just going to move on over to the other doctor. And when I made an appointment to see the other doctor, and I wanted him to look at the MRI, and he did. And he came in and he said, what's your concern? I said, I just want you to know what the other doctor said. He says there's a 5% probability that you've got cancer, and he wants to do the MRI. I want to know your thoughts on it. He said, that is the cleanest MRI I think I've ever seen. He said, outside of the fact that it is enlarged. And I'm going to tell you what I told you last time. As long as that you are able to go to the bathroom normally, you're not having any trouble going to the restroom, that you don't have like a weak stream or anything like that, you don't have any pain, you don't have any symptoms at all. He said, I think we just keep our eyes on it for a year and come see me in a year. And I said, man, you are so different than the other guy. And he said, well, I'm not going to talk anything negative about my colleague. He knows what he's doing, and he's got a lot of experience. He said, I just have a different take on it because I have seen hundreds and hundreds of men with prostate cancer, and you're not one of them. Because and I'm not going to do anything to you until I have a strong belief that we possibly are going to find it. He said, now I can do some things to shrink it if you want me to. He said, but you only do that when you're having problems urinating. And I said, what would you do? He said, I'd come back and see me in a year. So that's what I decided to do. So listen, if you're having trouble with your prostate, get more than one opinion, especially if your doctor is recommending the biopsy. Now, if they're feeling up in there and they're touching your prostate gland and they feel knots and nodules and hardness and bumps, by all means, get the biopsy. That's a good indicator that there is, cancer there. But if your PSA numbers are high, that is not an indicator, not an indicator. I'm not a medical doctor, but I have been told by medical doctors, especially urologists, that PSA is not conclusive as to whether or not you have cancer. It's just one of many indicators. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. And by all means, get another opinion and read the ebook that I have below. I did continue to take, even during my healthy track for 90 days, the dietary changes that I made. I also continued to take my medicine, and I referenced that in the book. But I also changed how often I take it. I don't take it every day. I take it like every 3 days. And I did that during the 3 months, and I still was able to lower it 7 points. And I believe that if I were to go to have it tested now, it would be back into normal range. So food for thought for those of us my age in this chapter of life. Be wise when it comes to that prostate. Thanks for watching and have a blessed day.